Hey there, Joel here from cosinesound.com.au. Thanks for joining me today. So we'll look at these synth patches that I've developed for these 6 bird sounds. So we've got black tern, bellbird, tree pipit, wren, nightingale, and a high-pitched bird sound. So first we'll look at the black tern, which is one of the most interesting ones, I think. Mainly because if we look back at the spectrogram here, just to refresh your memory, we've got these full series of harmonics, and there was another thing that I didn't note on the previous video, which was these successive tweets here have, as you can see, less harmonics than the previous ones, and they're actually sounding as though they're higher octaves. So just, for the sake of learning it, it would be great to just make these 2 different harmonic spectras here. So if we look at this single oscillator that I've made here, I've got 2 waves here. We've got 1 and 2 here, which is a morph wave. Now, I haven't actually really used the morphing. It's more of just a simple crossfade between these 2 waves. But as you can see, I've mapped the series here. So we've got harmonics 1 to 9 there. And what I actually noticed was that upon even closer inspection, I've done a better job of analyzing that sample. And you can see that in the sample, the harmonics are actually spaced about 1 kilohertz apart. And that means that the fundamental frequency is going to be at about 1K. But according to the graph, that first harmonic is very, very low amplitude. So I actually completely missed it. And it actually affects how far apart the harmonics are spaced. So now that we've got these mapped out, here's a demo. The second wavetable is the one which has apparently harmonics missing, and it's the 2nd, 4th, 6th, and 8th harmonic here. Now, the reason that we've used these is because they very clearly match the same harmonics in the previous tweets. So you can pretty much just copy that over and take out the other harmonics. At the moment, the most practical way to do it is to just crossfade between 2 oscillators, and then I'll just demonstrate that. So now if I use the mod wheel, it appears that it's going up an octave because the second harmonic now becomes the fundamental. The 4th harmonic is now the 2nd harmonic, and so on. So another way to demonstrate this is by going to the amplitude envelope I have here and just making this a sustain envelope instead of a release envelope. And I'll just hold down the note. You can see what's going on there. It sounds very much like it's jumping up an octave, but at the same time, it's still very much related to the fundamental. So yeah, a bit of ear trickery going on there. Another thing is, if we look back at the envelope, if we look at the actual waveform, you'll see these click sounds, and I've just added that in. Just change that back to... So here's the actual region that I'm using, which is just here. So here we go. If we look a bit closer at the step editor, we'll just play that again. And also we'll just put this over here. So using the morph parameter, we're just morphing that wave between the two wavetables. Very simple. Or should I say, once we know how that's done, I mean, it's very simple. Basically, we've just analyzed the spectrum, found the fundamental frequency. We found that at 1 kilohertz. So the first harmonic is at, you'll see down the bottom there, negative 56 dB roughly, so we can barely hear it. The next one, about negative 33. And the loudest ones are these two formant sort of peaks up here that look like formants. They're actually the third and the fifth harmonic, as I indicated before. And that's really where the key sound comes from. If we change this to like a saw wave shape, here's the difference. Very dramatic difference there. So the bump in the spectrum can really be emulated with like a bandpass filter. But once we have this sort of additive spectrum here, we can really refine the timbre of the sound. So that's the black tern. It's really cool bird sound. The next bird is the bellbird. This one is quite straightforward. As we demonstrated in the previous video, we identified the spectrum. Then we go to the oscillator, select the fundamental frequency. I mean, sometimes I do this depending on how many, different notes the bird hits, but if it's just a static note, we'll just go with a static oscillator frequency. Now we'll just have a look at that spectrogram, or the spectrum. So I've identified that we've got first, second, third, and fourth, and fifth, up to the eighth. Let's have a listen. It's pretty much a static sound. There's no pitch variation. However, I did just muffle the sound slightly with the velocity. So if we look at the velocity has the filter cut off on the third oscillator. That is just dampening the sound the softer we press the key. And it sort of emulates a distance. So yeah, that's the bellbird. Very annoying bird, apparently, because obviously all the bellbird species basically just occupy the same narrow band of the spectrum, and they're all fighting for it all at once. And they make a lot of noise, so some people hate them, some people like them, but a lot of people probably don't like them. So next one is the tree pipit. Very straightforward, just basically 2 tweet patterns and some modulation. So there's a single harmonic this time, single sine wave that has a bit of frequency modulation going on when I hold down the note. And I've just automated it a bit softer and, added a slight pitch offset. Very distinct, simple sound. Next one is the Wren. This one involved, because it's quite a complex bird sound, I've used different notes. So it's a very complex pattern, and I got away with it by using the Tweet XY pad. As you can see, the XY pad moves accordingly to change the rate and the depth of the tweets. And we've also got some automation happening, which I'll show you in a second. That's basically the automation. So we've also got that automating, because it's a macro control. And at the same time, I've obviously performed the notation. So we get a bit of transposition, fine tune, offset, and we get the tweet rate and the tweet depth changing. So there's a fair bit happening there. Single sine wave, once again, just a complex pattern. The Nightingale is one that had a similar pattern because we changed the rate rapidly at the end. However, we had to add another oscillator which gives a chirp sound. So one of these oscillators is doing the tweet, and the last one is a ring modulation doing the chirp sound. So here's the Nightingale. So pretty much just got constant pitch going of the up tweet, down tweet, and then the chirp sound. Did take a little bit of automation, as you can see there. Again, changing the rate and the depth on the last 2 notes, and then we have the static note. My bad. There was a bit of a click there. I should have gotten rid of that, but this is the ring modulation. If you'd like to learn more about the chirp sounds, I've made a video specifically on chirp sounds and cricket chirps, which some birds do sound a lot like crickets. So as you can hear, what we're using is ring modulation on a sine wave. And we're using a rough saw wave. This is a filtered saw wave. So this one has about about 19 harmonics, so it's not the full range, but it's still quite a bright sound. So that was at about 160 hertz. We just freeze that. So that's about between 9,000 and 3,000 hertz. So it's quite, a wide sound compared to a sine wave. Another accent that was applied was onto the pitch. So if we go down here, the pitch just ducks very rapidly. This envelope, it goes down about from 8K to about 3K and then back up. So it jumps down a bit more than a whole octave down and then up in the space of, I think that's about 20 milliseconds, so that's very fast. The other thing is that a lot of these bird tweets, especially the black tone, have very rapid tweets, so they were about between 85 and about 200 milliseconds. And this one is obviously less, 20 milliseconds, just for that ducking. If I get rid of it, you'll hear the difference. So the final bird sound is the higher pitch bird sound. The sort of indistinguishable, mysterious bird at the top of the spectrogram. So I've made an attempt at this. As you can see, we're using a single sine wave again. We're using a fixed frequency and a bandpass filter, which is sort of like an EQ. It gives it a bit of a filter spike in there. And so I'll give that a demo. So you can hear a bit of variation. We're getting some different whistling there, different pitches coming through. And that's coming from a couple things. So look at the envelope. So the envelope on oscillator C is an interesting pitch envelope and a decay. So the pitch envelope is just a static envelope with a LFO applied to it, which is one of the great things about Absynth is adding LFOs to the breakpoints. So I've actually got a couple different settings on those. Just for comparison, I'll turn that off. The LFO is adding quite a lot of depth in modulation to that. It's adding about almost a whole octave of buzz to that sound. So this is achieved by just selecting the second breakpoint onwards and then clicking the LFO button. We've set a depth here. We've set a very, very fast rate. And then I've actually set a different depth on the second breakpoint and a slightly slower rate on the second breakpoint. There's an additional dimension of pitch variation coming from the LFO. Now if I just turn that off again, here's the sound without any modulation applied. As you can see, the region I have is just triggering the notes with the keyboard, adding some random pitch variation with an LFO, adding slightly random filter variation. The actual shape of the wave is called inharmonic, and it's inharmonic meaning that there's a lot of odd numbers in there, so it gives a very sort of random, complex shape. There is a performance on that filter there, so here we go. Very straightforward. And then probably most significant is the rapid frequency modulation using the LFO on here, and then cutting out the sound, very rapidly cutting the sound. This cuts out at 100 milliseconds. That means we have a fast attack, ramping up, and a faster decay. The decay slope is actually, if I just click this button here, I'm able to change between the breakpoint distance and the overall timeline. Now, the breakpoint distance is about 30 milliseconds, but the whole duration of the sound is about 100 milliseconds. Very fast. If I just take up the decay level, that's the LFO. You can see the LFO pattern happening, but you can also see the LFO shape of the sine wave is maintained. The sine wave is very fast, but the complex shape is slow, so like this. So obviously the faster it is, the more of a buzz sound, and overall it gives a really complex sort of bird sound, because every time you press the key it's going to be slightly different mainly depending on this LFO shape. So actually, if I set it to polyphonic, it's going to be synchronized to the key. Now if I turn that off, just repeatedly pressing the key, you can see it triggers at a different point in the LFO wave. Turn this back on again. Sort of a very buzzy sound, like a buzzy cricket bird sound there. So now if I take this decay all the way down again, like this. If we wanted to take this a step further, we could assign these envelope breakpoints to macro controls, for example, the depth and the duration, and then manipulate those as you would with an XY pad, even similar to the bird tweet XY pad. And then we've got ourselves another bird tweet envelope. And as you can see, that's quite easy, and it can give a lot of variation, especially in combination with that global LFO. So there may be other ways to randomize it even more with other LFOs. But yeah, that's pretty close. I mean, you get the idea. It's a high-pitched bird sound, and it's got a lot of variation. Whenever I press the key, it's going to come out slightly different. And I can also just keep tweaking it with the LFO envelope breakpoints. That concludes the practical synth techniques for bird synthesis. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe by clicking the logo at the end of the video. Stay tuned, and we'll have more videos coming up. Cheers.